I'm going to marry my girlfriend. We were never legally married, so you won't get anything." My husband said it with the calm confidence of a man delivering a diagnosis. After 10 years together, after all the sacrifices, all the nights I stayed awake helping him build the life he enjoyed, he thought he could simply erase me with a sentence. I smiled. "That's surprising," I said, sliding a yellow envelope across the table. "For a doctor, you really don't read carefully before signing." The moment he looked inside, that it rarely begins with a shocking moment. A husband who stops asking how your day was. A husband who suddenly seems annoyed by the very person he once couldn't wait to come home to. Looking back, I could trace Michael's affair to dozens of tiny moments scattered across several years, but at the time, I didn't recognize them for what they were. Like many women in long marriages, I explained them away. He was stressed, he worked long hours, he was dealing with difficult patients, he was exhausted. After all, Michael wasn't just any doctor. He was an orthopedic surgeon, the kind of doctor whose schedule seemed designed by someone who hated sleep. The kind of doctor who left before sunrise and often came home after dark. The kind of doctor who had spent years convincing himself that every sacrifice he made was for our future. And for a long time I believed that too. We lived in Naperville, Illinois, in a beautiful 2-story home with white siding, a 3-car garage, and enough carefully maintained landscaping to satisfy the homeowners association. It wasn't a mansion, but it was the kind of house people slowed down to admire while walking their dogs. Michael liked to call it his house. I never corrected him. Not because it was true. Because some battles weren't worth fighting. At least that's what I used to think. The morning everything changed had started like any other Saturday. I woke up around 7, made coffee, and sat on the back patio, watching the sun rise over the neighboring yards. The weather was perfect, one of those crisp Midwest mornings that made you grateful summer hadn't completely surrendered to fall. Michael came outside 20 minutes later. He wasn't carrying coffee. He wasn't carrying breakfast. He wasn't carrying his phone, which immediately got my attention. Instead, he sat across from me and folded his hands together. The gesture felt rehearsed. I knew something was wrong before he said a word. "Emily," he began. My stomach tightened. "Nobody says your name like that unless they're about to change your life." He stared toward the fence rather than looking directly at me. Then he took a deep breath. "I'm seeing someone." There it was. Simple. Clinical. Almost emotionless. The way a surgeon might announce a successful procedure. For a few seconds, I simply stared at him. Not because I was surprised. Because I wasn't. Not entirely. Deep down, I'd known. The late nights that didn't make sense. The new cologne. The gym membership he'd suddenly become obsessed with. The way he'd started protecting his phone like it contained state secrets. No, the affair itself wasn't shocking. What shocked me was how little emotion he showed while admitting it. I set my coffee cup down. "How long?" "A little over a year." "A year." I nodded slowly. A year of lies. A year of shared dinners. A year of pretending. Michael seemed encouraged by my calmness. That was his first mistake. "I care about her," he continued. I said nothing. "I love her." Still nothing. Then came the sentence that told me exactly who my husband had become. "I'm going to marry her. Not if we divorce. Not if things work out. Not someday. I'm going to marry her." As if the future had already been decided. As if my role in the story had ended. I should have been devastated. Maybe a younger version of me would have been. But something strange happens when you've spent years quietly carrying a relationship on your shoulders. Eventually, exhaustion replaces heartbreak. I looked at him carefully. The expensive watch. The designer polo shirt. The confidence. The certainty. Michael genuinely believed he held all the power. Then he delivered the final blow. Or what he thought was the final blow. We were never legally married. I blinked. He continued speaking. Fast now. Confident. Almost eager. You remember when we talked about doing the courthouse paperwork years ago? We never finished it. There was never a legal filing. I almost laughed. Not because he was lying. Because he truly believed what he was saying. Michael, so legally speaking, there's nothing to divide. The house, the investments, my retirement accounts, everything belongs to me. My retirement accounts. My house. My investments. Not ours. His. I noticed the shift immediately. Maybe it had always been there. Maybe I had simply ignored it. 10 years together, and now he spoke as if I'd been a temporary guest in his life. He leaned back in his chair. I don't want this to get ugly. That nearly made me smile. Men who say they don't want things to get ugly are often the ones carrying the knife. I'll help you relocate. Relocate? Not move. Relocate. Like an employee being transferred. I'll give you some money to get started. Some money. After 10 years. I stared at him. Then I smiled. His expression changed slightly. Confusion flickered across his face. This wasn't how the conversation was supposed to go. I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't bargaining. Instead, I stood up and walked back inside. Emily? I ignored him. In the kitchen, I opened a drawer and removed a large yellow envelope. The same envelope I had hoped never to use. The same envelope that contained a lesson Michael should have learned long ago. Read before signing. I returned to the patio. Michael looked irritated now. What is this? I sat down. Then I slid the envelope across the table. He frowned. What am I looking at? Open it. He hesitated. Then he pulled out the documents. At first, his expression remained confident. Then confused. Then concerned. Then terrified. His eyes moved back to the first page. Then to the signature. Then back again. No. The word barely escaped his lips. I watched silently. No, that's impossible. For the first time that morning, he looked directly at me. Actually looked at me. His hands trembled. This isn't real. I leaned back. Look at the signature. His face turned pale. Because it was his signature. Not similar. Not close. His? The signature he'd used for years. The signature he'd placed on hundreds of legal documents without reading them. The signature sitting directly beneath an official marriage certificate issued 10 years earlier. The certificate proving that Dr. Michael Carter and Emily Carter had been legally married all along. And suddenly the man who had arrived expecting victory looked like he could barely breathe. Michael stared at the marriage certificate as if it might rearrange itself if he looked long enough. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The only sound came from a lawn mower somewhere down the street, and the distant laughter of children riding bicycles through the neighborhood. Ordinary sounds. Normal sounds. The kind of sounds that continue even when someone's life is quietly falling apart. This has to be fake. His voice sounded strained. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Read the seal. His eyes dropped to the bottom of the document. The official state seal. The filing number. The county clerk's certification. Every detail exactly where it belonged. Michael swallowed. This doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense. No, we talked about getting married at the courthouse, but we never actually... We did. His head snapped up. We absolutely did. The confusion in his eyes slowly gave way to memory. Not complete memory. Fragments. Pieces. The way people remember a movie they watched years ago. I could almost see it happening. The courthouse hallway. The paperwork. The signatures. The rushed afternoon. The fact that he had been checking emails between documents. The fact that he had signed wherever I pointed. The fact that he had never once asked what he was signing. 10 years earlier, Michael had been finishing his fellowship training. He was working 80-hour weeks, constantly exhausted and permanently distracted. At the time, we were planning a larger wedding ceremony for family and friends. His mother wanted a church wedding. My parents wanted a reception. Everyone had opinions. Eventually, I suggested something practical. Why don't we just get legally married now and have the celebration later? Michael barely looked up from his laptop. Whatever you think. 3 weeks later, we went to the courthouse. The process took less than 30 minutes. Michael spent most of that time answering work emails. I remembered laughing afterward. You know, most people pay attention during their own wedding. His response had been equally memorable. As long as I end up married to you, I don't really care about the paperwork. At the time, I'd found it romantic. Now it sounded like a warning. Back on the patio, Michael looked physically ill. No. I nodded. Yes. He stared at the document again. Then another thought hit him. I watched the exact moment it happened. The marriage certificate wasn't the real disaster. The marriage certificate was merely the first domino. His breathing became uneven. What else? I smiled slightly. What do you mean? What else is in this envelope? There it was. The question that mattered. I folded my hands calmly. You finally learned to ask before signing? His jaw tightened. Emily? I reached toward the stack and removed several documents. Property records. Refinancing agreements. Investment disclosures. Business ownership filings. Papers accumulated across a decade. Papers carrying one very familiar signature. His. Michael flipped through them. The color drained from his face even further. What are these? Documents. I can see that. Apparently not. His eyes narrowed. For the first time all morning, anger began replacing panic. You think this is funny? No. I paused. I think it's tragic. He tossed several papers onto the table. Yes. You told me where to sign. Yes. And now you're acting like this is my fault? The question hung in the air. For years, that version of Michael would have intimidated me. The successful surgeon. The respected professional. The man accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. But something had changed. Not in him. In me. I was no longer interested in protecting his ego. You signed legal documents without reading them. His face hardened. Because I trusted you. The words landed harder than he intended. For a brief moment, I felt the sting. Not because they were unfair. Because once upon a time, they had been true. He had trusted me. And I had trusted him. That was the entire foundation of our marriage. The difference was that I hadn't betrayed it. I never lied to you. He looked away. Every document was exactly what it claimed to be. You knew I was busy. Being busy isn't a legal defense. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Not because I felt guilty. Because he knew I was right. Michael stood abruptly. He began pacing across the patio. Years of confidence were evaporating in real time. I recognized the process because I'd watched patients' families experience similar moments in hospital waiting rooms. First denial, then confusion, then fear, then anger. Finally reality. How much? I looked up. How much what? How much of everything is marital property? There it was. The question he should have asked before announcing I would get nothing. I shrugged. I don't know. His eyes widened. You don't know? No. I took a sip of coffee. That's what attorneys are for. The mention of attorneys hit him like a punch. Because for the first time, Michael understood what was happening. This wasn't a dramatic argument. This wasn't emotional revenge. This was legal reality. The law didn't care about his confidence. The law didn't care about his affair. The law didn't care that he had convinced himself I was entitled to nothing. The law cared about documents. And documents had never been Michael's strength. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Vanessa. The girlfriend. He declined the call immediately. Then another message appeared. And another. I didn't need to see the contents. I already knew. She was probably planning brunch. Maybe a weekend getaway. Maybe discussing wedding venues. Poor woman. She had no idea the financial future Michael promised her was rapidly evaporating. By late afternoon, he had contacted a divorce attorney. By evening, he had scheduled an emergency consultation. By the next morning, he was sitting across from one of the most expensive family law attorneys in Chicago. I didn't attend the meeting, but I eventually learned exactly how it went. Because months later, during discovery, portions of the consultation became relevant. According to the attorney's notes, Michael arrived convinced the situation would be resolved quickly. He believed the marriage certificate might somehow be invalid. He believed most assets belonged exclusively to him. He believed the law would confirm what he wanted to hear. The attorney reviewed the documents, one by one, carefully. Unlike Michael, the meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. When it ended, the attorney removed his glasses and looked directly at him. "Dr. Carter, your problem isn't the marriage certificate." Michael reportedly felt relieved for half a second. Then the attorney continued. "Your problem is that your wife appears to have records for everything." Everything. One word. One devastating word. Because suddenly the issue wasn't whether they had been legally married. The issue was whether the woman Michael had underestimated for 10 years knew exactly how much she had helped build. And for the first time since his affair began, Michael started to realize he might not be the one controlling the outcome. For most of his adult life, Michael had been the kind of man who believed problems could be solved with enough intelligence, enough money, or enough confidence. Medicine had rewarded that mindset. When patients panicked, he stayed calm. When emergencies happened, he took control. When difficult decisions had to be made, people looked to him for answers. Over time, that confidence had become something else. Something more dangerous. Arrogance. And arrogance has a peculiar habit of convincing people that consequences are things that happen to other people, not to them. Certainly not to successful doctors. 3 days after our conversation on the patio, Michael came home earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Not because I was trying to save the marriage. Not because I was pretending nothing had happened. Honestly, I was cooking because it helped me think. There is something comforting about ordinary routines when life becomes chaotic. The rhythmic sound of chopping vegetables. The smell of garlic and olive oil. The familiar movements your hands know by heart. Michael walked into the kitchen carrying a thick legal folder. His face looked older than it had a week earlier. Not dramatically older. Just tired. The kind of tiredness that comes when certainty disappears. "We need to talk." I didn't look up. "We've been doing a lot of that lately." "This isn't funny." "No." I placed sliced carrots into a bowl. "It really isn't." He dropped the folder onto the counter. "Do you know what my attorney said?" "I can guess." "He said you've documented everything." I smiled slightly. "That's what responsible adults do." His jaw tightened. "You kept records for 10 years. I paid taxes for 10 years too. Is that suspicious?" For a moment, he seemed unsure whether I was mocking him. The truth was simpler. I wasn't mocking him. I was explaining reality. People keep records. Especially people who spend years helping manage a household, investments, insurance policies, mortgages, and retirement accounts. Michael had spent a decade assuming paperwork magically handled itself. Someone had to actually handle it. That someone had been me. He opened the folder and pulled out several pages. "Do you know what this says?" I glanced down. I recognized the document immediately. A refinancing agreement from 6 years earlier. Yes. It specifically identifies financial contributions from both spouses. Correct. His voice rose. "Why would you include that?" I stared at him. The question was so absurd I almost laughed. Because it was true. For several seconds he simply stood there. I could practically hear the gears turning inside his head. The problem wasn't the document. The problem was the worldview behind his question. Why would you include that? As though facts existed only when convenient. As though my contributions became real only if he approved them. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table. For the first time since I had known him, Michael looked genuinely lost. "You didn't earn what I earned." There it was. The sentence. The real issue. Not the affair. Not the divorce. not the paperwork. The belief that had been quietly growing inside him for years. I turned off the stove and sat across from him. "No," I spoke calmly. "I didn't earn what you earned." He nodded immediately, relieved, until I continued. "Because while you were building your career, I was helping build your life." His expression hardened. I continued anyway. "You remember your board certification exam?" Silence. "You studied every night for 6 months." Nothing. "I paid the bills, I handled the insurance, I scheduled repairs, I dealt with contractors, I managed family obligations, I handled everything that wasn't medicine." He looked away. I kept going. "You know why you had time to focus entirely on becoming a successful surgeon?" He didn't answer. "Because somebody else was carrying the rest of the weight." The room became quiet. Not comfortable quiet. Truth quiet. The kind nobody enjoys. Michael suddenly stood up. "I worked hard." "So did I." "I sacrificed." "So did I." "You don't understand what it took." I stared directly at him. "I understand exactly what it took." That ended the conversation. Not because he agreed, because he couldn't argue. The facts were sitting in front of him. Years of emails, financial records, property documents, tax filings, evidence. Not emotional claims. Evidence. A week later, a different problem arrived. Her name was Vanessa. I met her unexpectedly. Not intentionally. Not dramatically. I was leaving a grocery store when I spotted Michael standing near the entrance. Beside him stood a woman in her early 30s. Blonde. Attractive. Perfectly styled. The kind of woman social media was designed to reward. She recognized me immediately. Michael had clearly shown her photographs. The awkwardness was immediate. Michael looked trapped. Vanessa looked curious. And I felt surprisingly calm. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Vanessa offered an uncomfortable smile. "Emily?" "Vanessa." Her eyebrows lifted. "You know who I am?" I almost laughed. "You're the woman my husband plans to marry." Michael closed his eyes. Vanessa's smile disappeared. The conversation that followed lasted less than 2 minutes. But it told me everything I needed to know. Vanessa had expected a recently divorced surgeon. She had not expected a legally married surgeon facing a potentially expensive divorce. More importantly, she had not expected Michael to conceal that fact. As she asked questions, I watched confusion appear on her face. Then concern. Then irritation. Then something else. Calculation. By the end of the exchange, she wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at Michael. And she wasn't liking what she saw. Over the following weeks, their relationship began unraveling. Not because of me. Because reality had entered the room. The fantasy disappeared. There would be no quick divorce. No effortless transition. No clean financial slate. There would be lawyers. Negotiations. Asset disclosures. Potential court proceedings. Consequences. One evening, nearly a month after everything began, Michael showed up at the house alone. Again. Only this time, something was different. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was fading. The certainty had disappeared completely. Vanessa left. I wasn't surprised. "When?" "Yesterday." I nodded. He laughed bitterly. "That's all you have to say." "What would you like me to say?" He looked toward the floor. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he said something I never expected. "She thought I lied to her." I raised an eyebrow. "You did." His laugh turned into a painful sigh. The irony finally seemed to be reaching him. Not completely, but enough. And as he stood there in the house we had built together, abandoned by the woman he risked everything for, facing legal realities he never bothered to understand, Michael Carter finally encountered something his education, his income, and his ego couldn't solve. Himself. The collapse of a marriage rarely happens all at once. People imagine dramatic explosions, screaming matches, slammed doors, public confrontations. In reality, most marriages die the same way old houses do. A crack appears. then another, then another. And one day, everyone realizes the structure has been unstable for years. By the beginning of winter, Michael and I were living separate lives under separate roofs. He had rented a luxury apartment near downtown Chicago, partly because it was convenient for work, and partly because his pride wouldn't allow him to move somewhere modest. Pride, however, is an expensive habit, especially when attorneys start sending invoices. The divorce process moved forward steadily. Not quickly, not slowly, just steadily. The way legal reality tends to move. There were meetings, financial disclosures, property evaluations, retirement account assessments, endless paperwork. Ironically, Michael was finally reading every page. I sometimes found myself smiling whenever our attorneys exchanged documents. After 10 years of signing without looking, he had become the most careful reader in Illinois. Some lessons arrive late, but they arrive. One snowy afternoon, I met my friend Karen for lunch at a small cafe near downtown Naperville. Karen and I had known each other for almost 12 years. She had witnessed nearly every stage of my marriage. The good years, the difficult years, and now the ending. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "How are you really doing?" I considered the question. Most people ask how you're doing because they're being polite. Karen asked because she genuinely wanted the answer. "I think I'm finally breathing again." She nodded. "I can see that." And surprisingly, she was right. For months after discovering the affair, I had expected overwhelming grief. The grief came. Of course it did. 10 years doesn't disappear overnight. But something else appeared too. Relief. The relief was harder to explain. The truth was that Michael had been leaving emotionally long before he physically left. For years I had been trying to preserve a relationship that only one person was actively maintaining. Now that the struggle was over, the exhaustion began lifting. Karen smiled. "You look different." "Different how?" "Happier." I laughed. "My husband left me." "Your cheating husband left you." "Fair point." She leaned forward. "No, seriously, you seem lighter." I thought about that. Maybe she was right. For the first time in years, my decisions belonged entirely to me. I wasn't scheduling my life around a surgeon's unpredictable hours. I wasn't minimizing my own needs. I wasn't constantly adjusting to someone else's priorities. The freedom felt strange, but good. Very good. A month later, I decided to do something I had postponed for years. I launched my consulting business. The idea wasn't new. And operational logistics. Several small businesses had already approached me for advice informally. Karen had been encouraging me for years. Now I finally had the time. And the confidence. The business started small. Very small. A home office. A simple website. A handful of clients. Nothing glamorous. Nothing dramatic. But every new client felt meaningful because it belonged entirely to me. Not Michael. Not us. Me. Meanwhile, Michael's world continued changing. Not catastrophically. Not unfairly. Simply honestly. The consequences of his choices became visible. Friends learned the truth. Not because I launched a campaign against him. I never did. I never posted online. I never spread rumors. I never called colleagues. People simply asked questions. And the answers eventually emerged. The respected surgeon who had spent years cultivating an image of stability had cheated on his wife and attempted to convince her she was entitled to nothing. People noticed. Some remained loyal. Others quietly stepped back. Most simply saw him differently. Reputations don't usually collapse from one mistake. They change when a mistake reveals character. One evening in February, I attended a charity fundraiser supporting healthcare access for low-income families. I had volunteered with the organization for years. The event wasn't extravagant. A hotel ballroom, silent auction tables, local sponsors, community leaders, ordinary people trying to help. I spent most of the evening speaking with donors and volunteers. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't introduced as Michael's wife. I was introduced as Emily Carter. Consultant, volunteer, board member. The distinction mattered more than I expected. Near the end of the evening, I stepped outside to get some fresh air. Snow drifted quietly across the parking lot. The city lights reflected off the clouds. For several minutes, I stood alone. Then I heard a familiar voice. Emily. I turned. Michael. He looked thinner. Not unhealthy. Just changed. The last several months had aged him. Not physically as much as emotionally. He approached slowly. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence felt different now. Less hostile. More honest. You look good, he finally said. Thank you. You seem happy. I smiled slightly. I am. He nodded, as though he already knew. For a moment, we simply watched the snow fall. Then he spoke again. I miss you. The words landed softly. Not because they were manipulative. Because they were genuine. I could hear the truth in them. The problem was that truth arrives too late sometimes. I looked at him carefully. The man standing before me wasn't the same man who sat on the patio months earlier. The arrogance had weakened. The certainty had disappeared. The entitlement had been stripped away. What remained looked much more human. And much more lonely. I know. His eyes lowered. Do you hate me? The question surprised me. I considered it seriously. No. His head lifted. I don't. He seemed almost confused. After everything, he expected hatred. Maybe he even believed he deserved it. But hatred requires energy. And I was done spending energy on the past. I was angry. I paused. Very angry. He nodded. You had every right. Maybe. The snow continued falling. Cars moved through the parking lot. Life continued. As it always does. Then, Michael asked the question he had been building toward all evening. Could we have coffee sometime? Not reconciliation. Not romance. Just coffee. A conversation. A chance to say something he hadn't yet said. I studied him for several seconds. Then I nodded. One coffee. Relief washed across his face. Not victory. Relief. Because for the first time since this entire nightmare began, Michael wasn't asking for another chance. He was asking for the opportunity to take responsibility. And strangely enough, I thought he might finally be ready. 3 weeks later, I met Michael at a small independent coffee shop in downtown Naperville. It was a quiet place with brick walls, old photographs of local landmarks, and the comforting smell of fresh coffee beans. The kind of place where people read books, worked on laptops, or sat alone with their thoughts. A fitting place for difficult conversations. I arrived first. Old habits die hard. For years, I had been the one who arrived early. The one who planned. The one who remembered. The one who prepared. Some things never change. A few minutes later, Michael walked in. He spotted me immediately. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he approached and sat down across from me. No lawyers. No documents. No negotiations. Just two people who had once loved each other. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply honest. Finally, Michael folded his hands together. The same gesture he had used on the patio months earlier. Only this time, everything was different. I owe you an apology. I didn't interrupt. I should have said that a long time ago. His voice was calm. Not rehearsed. Not dramatic. Just sincere. I spent months thinking the affair was my biggest mistake. He looked down briefly. Then I realized it wasn't. I waited. The affair was terrible. He paused. But it wasn't the beginning. I felt something tighten inside my chest. Because I already knew where he was going. The beginning happened years earlier. His eyes met mine. When I started believing I was more important than you. The words hung between us. Simple. Painful. True. Michael laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. I told myself a lot of stories. I remained silent. I told myself I earned more, so I contributed more. Another pause. I told myself my career mattered more. He shook his head. I told myself that because I was a surgeon, everything else somehow revolved around me. Outside the window, a couple walked past holding hands. Inside, the espresso machine hissed quietly. Life continued moving around us. And for once, Michael wasn't trying to control the conversation. He was simply telling the truth. You know what my attorney said during one of our meetings? I raised an eyebrow. What? Michael smiled sadly. He said something that made me angry at the time. What was it? He said I confused income with value. The sentence hit harder than I expected, because it summarized almost everything. The marriage, the affair, the arrogance, the betrayal, all of it. Michael continued. He said I kept looking at bank statements while completely ignoring everything that made those bank statements possible. I remembered the years, the moves, the sacrifices, the endless details, the birthdays organized, the mortgages managed, the repairs scheduled, the family emergencies handled, the dinners waiting after impossible shifts, the emotional labor nobody ever sees because it's invisible when it's done correctly. For years, Michael had treated those things like background noise. Now he finally understood they had been part of the foundation. I should have appreciated you. His voice cracked slightly. I should have respected you. I took a slow breath. The apology felt real. Not because it erased anything. Nothing could. But because it acknowledged reality. And reality matters. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled gently. Do you know what the funny part is? Michael looked confused. What? The yellow envelope. A faint smile appeared on his face. The laughter faded. Then I said something he clearly wasn't expecting. The envelope didn't destroy your life. His expression changed. I continued. You did. Not cruelly. Not angrily. Simply honestly. The documents were always there. He nodded. The signatures were always yours. Another nod. The warnings were there too. He looked down. Because he knew I was right. The envelope hadn't created consequences. It had revealed them. The real damage had happened years earlier, one careless decision at a time. One act of entitlement. One assumption. One lie. One betrayal. Until eventually there was nowhere left to hide. The divorce settlement was finalized 2 months later. The outcome wasn't dramatic. No one lost everything. No one walked away destroyed. And that mattered. Because real justice isn't destruction. Real justice is fairness. The assets were divided according to the law, according to documented contributions, according to reality. I received exactly what I deserved. Nothing more. Nothing less. Michael retained enough to continue his career and rebuild his future. The process hurt, but it was fair. And fairness, unlike revenge fantasies, can actually survive contact with real life. Over the following year, my consulting business continued growing. New clients arrived through referrals. Then more referrals. Then partnerships. The organization where I volunteered invited me to join its board of directors. My life became fuller than I was gone. Through someone else's success. As for Michael, he continued practicing medicine. From what I heard, he became a different doctor. A better one. Not necessarily more skilled. More humble. He listened more carefully. Spoke more thoughtfully. Treated people with greater patience. Pain has a way of teaching lessons success never can. Almost 18 months after our divorce became final, I attended a mentoring event for women returning to the workforce after difficult life transitions. Divorce. Widowhood. Caregiving responsibilities. Interruptions. Every woman. Of course. She hesitated. My husband keeps telling me that because he earns all the money, everything belongs to him. I looked at her quietly. For a moment, I saw a younger version of myself standing there, unsure, questioning her own worth, wondering whether contributions only count when they come with a paycheck. I smiled. Then I gave her the lesson it had taken me years to fully understand. Never let someone convince you that your contribution doesn't matter just because they earn more money. Her eyes widened slightly. I continued. A healthy relationship isn't built on who earns more. It's built on respect. She nodded slowly, and I hoped she remembered those words. Not money. Not status. Not education. Not success. Respect. Months later, I found myself thinking about the yellow envelope again. People would probably assume it represented revenge. Maybe it did. A little, but not in the way most people imagine. The real revenge wasn't taking Michael's money. It wasn't humiliating him. It wasn't ruining his career. The real revenge was something much simpler. He spent years believing I had no value without him. Then life forced him to discover how wrong he was. And in the end, that lesson changed both of us. Success does not excuse betrayal. Intelligence means nothing without humility. And sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is allowing someone to face the consequences of their own choices. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever seen someone underestimate the quiet contributions that hold a family together? Share your perspective in the comments below. And if you enjoy thoughtful stories about resilience, justice, and second chances,